Oh, it is wonderful to be a Christian. Oh, it is wonderful to be God's child. Oh, it is wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it is wonderful to be redeemed, justified, forever reconciled.
Hello out there in Radio Land. This is Michael. This is the Street Preacher's Corner podcast, the podcast where we pick them up and we lay them back down. That's mostly a reference to the flooring project in my house that has taken over vast quantities of my life, and it feels like we'll never stop. But it also applies to the podcast, which are always picking them up and laying them back down. Speaking of picking them up and laying them back down, we are in Mark lesson 102, if you can believe such a thing, and we are in Mark chapter 12. And in Mark chapter 12, we're going to start in verse 11, which is actually the end of kind of where we left off last time. If you recall, Jesus told three parables back to back to the chief priests and the scribes and the elders, and all three were the same lesson about how God had entrusted them with something and they had disregarded it. And so then they were looking down the barrel of their own destruction as a result. Well, they leave. Verse 11 says, "This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes." Verse 12, "And they sought to lay hold on him, but feared the people, for they knew that he had spoken the parable against them. And they left him and went their way. And they sent unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words. But when they were come, they said to him, Master, we know that thou art true and carest for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not?" Now, this is still D-3. This is still 3 days before Passover. Jesus really knows how to pack a lot into a day, after all. And in verse 11, the they that we talk about are the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders that are mentioned expressly in Mark 11, verse 27. But in verse 12, what these guys do, after having received three rather pointed parables pointed directly at them, what they do is they beat a hasty strategic retreat, and they deploy the reserve troops. Now, also in verse 12, the people, let's read it. Let's read what it actually says. "And they sought to lay hold of him, but feared the people, for they knew that he had spoken the parable against them." Now, they could be the chief priests and everything, or the they could be the people. But what I think is going on here is in verse 12, the people, they realize that the priests and the scribes and the elders also realized that Christ was talking about them. You know, these guys live a life of privilege in the midst of this vast religious structure that bears only a passing resemblance to what God had actually given the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had taken the things that God had given them, and they had built a bunch of other stuff on top of it, a bunch of edifices and a bunch of dumb customs and a bunch of dumb traditions and a bunch of double standards. But because these guys are the people in charge, they can get away with it. And so what Jesus Christ does with his parables and with his very presence, what he does is he just kind of walks up there and knocks over this little sandcastle that they've built out of their own pomp and circumstance, and the people see this. We talked about this before. Every time Jesus has a public encounter with these folks, they lose some esteem in the eyes of the people, because the people see, here's a guy who has the goods, and that guy that has the goods is putting these other fellows in their place. And I thought about this for a little bit. Imagine putting your trust in a religious authority or a man or a council of some kind, or an organization or a corporation, and you find out that those guys are phonies and shams, and they are self-righteous children of the devil. That's what the people are beginning to realize. The heart of the common people, you'll see this later on in Mark 12, the heart of the common people responded to Jesus Christ. And every time every time these guys bumped into Christ and tried to trap him, they wind up looking like idiots. And this happens over and over and over again. So after a while, people are going to catch on. Hey, maybe these guys that are with the long robes and the phylacteries and the big prayers out in town, maybe they don't really know what they're talking about. Because this guy's coming along telling simple things that everybody can understand, and he's showing them up. And he's pointing to them as, you were given this great stewardship over the God's vineyard, and you betrayed it. It's like I said, imagine you're putting your trust in something like that and finding out that it's all a sham, it's all fake. And that still happens, right? When people leave a cult or a false religion, it is very easy to feel betrayed. And the reason somebody like that would feel betrayed is because you were betrayed. People that had access to you take somebody like the current pope, who I think his name is Francis, and he's got a Bible. He's got access to a Bible. He's got access to everything I've got access to, and then some. And he could take that, and he could use that to dismantle this organization that he's part of, and he could point people not to himself and his religious trappings and his pointy hat, but he could use that position and that microphone he has to point people towards Jesus Christ. And he doesn't, because it's not in his best interest to do that. If you realize that nobody, if the people realize that they no longer need the guy with the pointy hat, then all of a sudden the guy with the pointy hat's out of a job. But he has betrayed the millions of people that heed his advice and hold him in high regard. And when you come out of a situation like that, and I've never really been in a situation like that, but I've talked to a ton of people that have. When you come out of a situation like that, unless you replace the fake with the real, you will become cynical and bitter and disillusioned. I read a book earlier this year. I think it was called Leaving the Witness. And it was about a lady who was a Jehovah's Witness, and her husband had been sent by the Watchtower Society to China to be missionaries in China. And there's all these interesting rules that you have to follow when you're in China and you're a J-Dub. You almost can't tell anybody that you're a J-Dub because it's illegal to be one. And so you have to make friends with people, and you have to stay friends with them for years and years and years. And you can't really meet with other J-Dubs to encourage yourself or to get the latest marching orders. All the meetings are done under assumed names, and all the meetings are done in like clandestine circumstances. Because the idea is if you get picked up by the cops, they don't want you to actually have anybody's real name you can turn them over to. Anyway, this lady, she got over there with as a JW missionary person, and she became very disillusioned with the organization. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, and she goes into that. Very few of them were really doctrinal reasons. She started talking to some dude on the internet, because that always works out well. And she started talking to this dude on the internet, and this dude on the internet convinced her that the Watchtower Society was wrong about this and wrong about that and wrong about these other things. But what that guy did not offer her was anything to replace it with. So after talking to this guy on the internet for months and months and months, she decides to fly back to America and have an affair with this fellow. And he's all about it when she first shows up, but then once all that's happened, he doesn't have any use for her anymore. So she goes back to China, where her marriage is in shambles, and it was in shambles for a long time. But anyway. So she winds up leaving the organization, but her entire life was wrapped up in the organization. All her friends, all her relatives, everything she knew her whole life had been wrapped up in the Watchtower Society, and they just kicked her to the curb and left her out there to fend for herself to find her own way back to America. They left her in China. And she has no education to speak of. And so then later on she goes and she finds herself in New York City, and she has a shack up with a fella, and she has a baby, and this baby is the joy of her life in this book. And it is the only thing in her life that has no ties back to the Watchtower Society. It's the only thing that she has that's all hers. And then the baby dies. The child dies. And the end of that book is her being this bitter, disillusioned nihilist who says no one's coming to save you, no one's come to help you, there's no point to anything, life is just sorrow and darkness and death, and that's how the book ends. And that's how that can happen. When you leave something like that, unless you replace the fake with the real, you'll become a wash-up, you'll become a has-been. I mean, how many angry ex-Catholics, if you go out and you witness to people, how many angry ex-Catholics or bitter ex-Catholics have you talked to? Probably a bunch. How many bitter ex-independent fundamental Baptist kids have we talked to? Yeah, the funny thing about church kids, when you find and they're bitter, and they're angry, and they're disillusioned and cynical and broken. If you poke long enough, what you will find is there was some hypocrisy in the lives of their pastor or of their parents or whatever. And a lot of times their bitterness is a reaction to that hypocrisy. Or there was some weird culty behavior, which you do get sometimes with IFB churches for whatever reason. And so that's what spurns all that. When people leave the fake and they don't replace it with the real. And so fortunately, we can turn from the fake to the real. And when we do, Jesus Christ embraces us and sustains us. It is so unbelievably gracious of him to do so, to embrace people, to seek out people who have spent their entire lives believing lies about him and embracing lies and propagating lies about him when the truth was out there and the truth was available. And something you ought to consider about in your own ministry is that you ought to be really, really careful. You ought to be fearful that you're not the reason that somebody stumbles. Don't make somebody stumble by your life. Don't make somebody stumble by your shortcomings. Don't make somebody stumble by your false doctrine. You know, I got 4 kids, and they're all adults now, except for my youngest, who might never technically be an adult in the full meaning of that word. But my kids can tell you about times their dad lost his temper. My kids can tell you stories about things that I've mishandled. What my kids cannot accuse me of is hypocrisy. I have been very real in front of them. I've never been, let's put on a happy face for church. And when things are not right, you deal with them, and you address them, and you fix them, and you go on for Jesus Christ. And so if my kids were ever bitter, it would be because of something else. Back to the text. So it says, they sought to lay hold of him and feared the people, for they knew he had spoken the parable against them, and they left him and went their way. And they sent on him certain of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. Now there's an interesting thing in John 7. Let's be turning to John 7. John 7 takes place earlier in the life of Jesus Christ than Mark 12. And in John 7, let's see if I can find it. Let's see, John 7, that's 6, that's not any good. John 7, verse 25. Yeah, so, it says, said some of them of Jerusalem, is this not he whom they seek to kill? So this is people looking at Jesus and say, hey, that's the guy that the fellows in the long robes and the pointy hats, that's the guy they want dead. But lo, he speaketh boldly, and they say nothing unto him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is the very Christ? So what the common people observed in their interactions with Jesus is that these guys, A, wanted Jesus dead, and B, were a little bit afraid of him. That's interesting, isn't it? Common, ordinary people saw these run-ins with the Pharisees and with the Sadducees, with the chief priests and the elders and the scribes, and they understood the nature of these interactions. They understood what was going on using just their own 2 eyes and some common sense. So not only do these fellows lose face every time they confront Jesus, they erode their own authority over the people. And they try to trip up Jesus in front of other people, and what happens is they get tripped up. And it looks like these 3 parables that are in Matthew 21, Matthew 22, and Mark 11, or beginning of Mark 12, it looks like these 3 parables, they dealt a fatal blow. And so these men, these religious fakers, these religious hypocrites, these whitewashed sepulchres, they run, and they send in somebody else in verse 13. Look back to Mark 12, verse 13. They sent in him certain of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. Now, when the reserve troops show up in verse 13, they use a different tactic. They use the tactic of flattery. Look at verse 14. When they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true, and carest for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. It is flattery with an objective. And the objective here is not to really get an answer out of Jesus. Right? They plan on killing the guy. Do they really care what his opinion is about what they're about to ask? The objective is to get him, to entangle him in his talk, to catch him in his words in front of other people. And having failed to pin him down when it comes to quote-unquote religion, what they try to do is they try to pin him down when it comes to politics. But before you do that, before you con a guy, you got to prime the mark a little bit first. Not that this has anything to do with the text, but do you know why the object of a con is called a mark? I had a very unusual childhood, and because I had an unusual childhood, I know some things that might not be common knowledge to everybody in the world. But the reason that they're called a mark is it harkens back to the old vaudeville days and the old early circus days, Barnum and Bailey, and that era of time. And the guy who was the barker, the guy who would be calling you into the tent to have you look at the yak lady or the bearded man, probably not the bearded man, probably the bearded lady. It's not unusual. You wouldn't pay money to see a man with a beard. You can see that any place. Say a woman with a beard. Well, let's pay money for that. But as the guys would let you in, they would note who in the crowd was a high roller who had money in his pocket, and sometimes they would throw their arm around that guy to show him into the tent, and they would put a mark on that guy's back with a piece of chalk, just a little mark, and that's so that the pickpockets would know who to hit. That has nothing to do with anything. But But what they're trying to do here is they're trying to trip Jesus up in his words. They're trying to embarrass him in front of the people, and they're trying to pin him down. And the reason they're going to say nice things to him. They're going to come at him like they're his friends. They're coming at him like they're people that are devout seekers of the truth. And what they are is they're insincere scorners. But the reason they think that this flattery will work is because it almost always does. Be turning back to Psalms, the book of Psalms. I think it's Psalm 12. Keep coming here. Psalm 12. That's too far back. Psalm 12, the Bible do say in verse 1, "Help, Lord, for the godly man ceaseth, for the faithful fail from among the children of men." Well, that's quite a spot to be in. You're calling out to God because the good men are having a hard time staying in the fight, and the faithful men are failing, right? Verse 2, "They speak vanity, every one with his neighbor, with flattering lips, and with a double heart do they speak. The Lord shall cut off all flattering lips, and the tongue that speaketh proud things." So it's easy, according to Psalm 12, it is easy for a good man, it's easy for a godly man, it's easy for a faithful man to fall victim to flattery. And people that are flattering you are doing so with an agenda. You're warned in Proverbs 6, and in Psalm 36, and in Proverbs 20, and in Proverbs 28, and in Proverbs 29, to beware of people that are trying to butter you up to get something out of you. And that's what these fellows are doing here. And God has no patience for such things. And in Daniel 11, the flattery is a tool of the Antichrist. It's one of the things he's going to use to weasel his way into power. And God has no patience for those things. But clearly these fellows here in Mark 12, they are barking up the wrong tree here. They're barking up the wrong tree in regards to Jesus. And back in Mark 12, verse 14. Now, if you look at what they said, "Master, we know that thou art true." Well, that's a true statement, right? Jesus Christ said, "I am the way, the truth, the life." It's true that Jesus is true. "Master, we know thou art true and carest for no man." Jesus did not spend a whole lot of time worried about what anybody thought about what he was doing. He was there to do the will of the Father. He was there to fulfill the will of the Father. He was there to redeem worthless things like me. And so in that capacity, he didn't have much time for the opinions of people. God doesn't have much time for the opinions of people. So those are both true statements. "For that regardeth not the person of men," that's a true statement, "but teaches the way of God in truth." So all those are true statements. But the question is dishonest. And the question is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Now, this is dishonest on a couple of levels. And it's dishonest because they don't really want the answer. That's one level is dishonest. But the other reason that it's dishonest is that words mean things, and they're asking, is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar? That's the word they use. That's their word, not mine. It is an interesting choice of words, and I submit to you, friends, be turning to Ezekiel, that they trap themselves by using that word, because that word has a definition. Ezekiel 18. Now, it's kind of a long stretch of passage here. We're going to get through it. The Bible says, "But if a man be just, and do that which is lawful and right, and hath not eaten upon the mountains, neither hath lifted up his eyes to the idols of the house of Israel, neither hath defiled his neighbor's wife, neither hath come near to a menstruous woman, and hath not oppressed any, but hath restored to the debtor his pledge, hath spoiled none by violence, hath given his bread to the hungry, and hath covered the naked with a garment. He that hath not given forth upon usury, neither hath taken any increase, but hath withdrawn his hand from iniquity, hath executed true judgment between man and man, hath walked in my statutes, and kept my judgments, and deal truly, he is just. He shall surely live, saith the Lord God." So the Bible, we could go down, the plan was to get to verse 27, but I don't know if we're going to make it that far. So you look here in verse 5, the words lawful and the words right, or the words lawful and the words good, show up several times between verse 5 and verse 27. And they're always paired together, which means they're synonyms. And then, so if you, in case you were wondering what those two words mean, you can look and say, it gives you some examples of what they don't mean. It gives you an example of idolatry. Idolatry is not lawful and good. Adultery is not lawful and good. Charging interest, usury, to your brother in the nation of Israel is not good. Now, lawful and good, according to verse 8, includes, verse 9, includes walking in the statutes of the Lord and dealing with and keeping God's judgments and dealing truly with people and dealing just with people. And it goes on down through there. So we know that if you make a list, on one side, lawful and good is good things and lawful things, and the other side is unlawful things, things that are against God. You say, well, that's so what? Well, look at Ezekiel 33. You see almost the exact same list later on. Let's see, starting at verse 14. "Again, when I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, if he turn from his sin and do that which is lawful and right," there it is again. "If the wicked restore the pledge," we mentioned that before, "give again the he had robbed," mentioned that before, "walk in the statutes of life," well, mentioned that before, "without committing iniquity, he shall surely live, he shall not die. None of his sins he hath committed shall be mentioned unto him. He hath done that which is lawful and right. He shall surely live." So what's your point, Mike? Well, it would be easy to say, these guys asked Jesus, was it, should you pay your taxes? And Jesus' commandment to them was pay your taxes. And most of the people that cover this passage, this could be turned back to Mark 12, most of the people that talk about this passage, that's exactly where they go. They say, well, Jesus said you ought to pay your taxes, so quit complaining, Michael, and pay your taxes, because nobody hates taxes more than I do. Hardly anybody talks about why Jesus answered the way he did. So, okay, let's acknowledge that there's a lot going on here, right? So Israel, at this point in Mark 12, Israel has been occupied for some time now, and not for the first time. Israel is occupied by the Roman government. The Romans give them a lot of leeway in their day-to-day lives, but at the end of the day, there's some things you cannot do because they're against Roman law, and there are some things you must do because they are Roman law. And the reason they are occupied is because of sin. If you go to Deuteronomy 28, we'll look at it. Deuteronomy 28. The prediction, or the proclamation from God is that if the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are living in their land, and they are in good fellowship with God, in a very general sense. That God will give them protection from enemies, and God will let them rule themselves. But they get out of line, and God sends in someone to rule over them. Genesis 28, verse 49. The Lord shall bring a nation. Let me back up. Let's see. Verse 48. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck till he have destroyed thee. This is God putting the yoke of iron upon the neck of Israel. That's who the he is, right? The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young, and he shall eat the fruit of thy cattle and the fruit of thy land, till thou shalt be destroyed. I just want you to understand that God had sent in the Romans. And ironically, turn to Romans 13. Ironically, the Romans are the legitimate Romans 13 authority in Israel in Mark 12. They're there because God sent them. They're doing what God had given them to do. Romans 13, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore you must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also. Remember they asked, is it lawful to pay tribute unto Caesar? For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. So God delegates authority. And the reason he delegates authority is for the purpose of encouraging righteousness and discouraging wickedness. That is the job of a government, is to keep good people safe and throw bad people in jail. And wickedness is discouraged by punishment, according to Romans 13. Now, obviously, clearly, men take the power that God allows them to have, and they misuse it, and God deals with them when they do. My point is, by saying that the Roman government is, in Mark 12, that Romans are the legitimate rulers of Israel because God sent them in to punish Israel. That doesn't that doesn't mean you have to love everything the Romans have done, everything the Romans are doing. If you're an Old Testament Jew living here in Mark 12 and you've been occupied by the Romans, your obligation is to pay tribute to them and to live in such a way that God removes them. I'm not going to say this is a hard and fast rule for every other country in the world, but I'll say the pattern is there. Like I said, you can acknowledge the legitimacy of pagan Rome being in charge in Palestine in Mark 12 without loving the wickedness of Rome, the idolatry of Rome, the perversion of Rome. I'm just trying to establish, by and large, they were good. If the job of government is to leave good people alone and throw bad people in jail, by and large, with all their problems, the Romans were pretty good at that. In all the territories that they conquered, they instituted laws and they punished criminals, and I mean the Romans had even built the temple that they're standing in front of. The Romans, for all their shortcomings and all their idolatry and all their perversions and all their weirdness and all their other stuff, what they would never do, for example, is they would never plot and scheme to kill an innocent man. You think about Pilate. When the situation when Jesus got set in Pilate's lap, Pilate did just about everything he could do to not put Jesus to death, because he understood that he was an innocent man and that it's wrong to put innocent men to death. And if you put innocent men to death, that is a perversion or a misuse of the authority and power God has given you. Now, Pilate might not have said it in those words, but I think he understood that. But the men that are standing here in Mark 12 asking Jesus if something's lawful, they are plotting the murder of the man who is answering the question. They're quibbling about whether or not they should pay their taxes while they're plotting murder. It's wild. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar? Well, you could ask, is it lawful to sit around and plot to kill a man? Look, Caesar is, despite his faults, he is keeping order, and as such he is owed tribute, according to Romans 13. Now, they're also doing stuff that has nothing to do with Romans 13. Like I said, Rome's got its issues. And the Israelites are forced to live under pagan idolaters because they sinned. The average Old Testament Jew here in Mark 12, he sees things every day living under this Gentile government. He sees things every day that rub him the wrong way as a Jew. And yet, he has to endure them because this is part of the conditions that his nation has to live under because of their sin. You remember when Nebuchadnezzar rolled into town back, way back in your Old Testament, and carted off people to Babylon? The reason they were carted off to Babylon is because of idolatry. And God told them over and over and over again, you need to put away your idols, or I'm going to have to punish you. You got to put away your idols, or I'm going to have to punish you. And they didn't. And so as a result, they had a situation where a king came in and carted them off to a foreign land. And then that king that carted them away to a foreign land, not too long after that, built a big golden statue and said, bow down to it, or I'm going to put you in the fiery furnace. And whenever I read that part of the Bible, this is not me trying to put words in God's mouth, but I just can imagine God up in heaven going, "Hey, I thought you were into idols. I thought you wanted that stuff. I thought you were up for it." And so sometimes, that sort of thing pans out like that. And I'm not saying that you want to be careful when you start applying this sort of thing, right? So I'm living in a country right now, and if you're listening to this, probably so are you, since most of my audience is Americans. And we endured 4 years of absolute depravity. And I think the people of God cried out to God, and we were given a reprieve from going any further down that road. But the guys that we were placing with, there's some issues there too. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time applying that to America because we're not Israel. Enough other people have done that. But I will say this: that I think that you do get the government you deserve, and sometimes the government you get is the judgment of God upon you. And so, when you find yourself in that situation, your responsibility is to give tribute to whom tribute is due, and to live a good, godly life where you obey God as much as you can and as sincerely as you can, in the hopes that God will remove this iron yoke from around your neck. And there you go. And there are people that, there are Israelites that grew up their entire lives in Babylon and were born there and lived there and died there, never having once seen the land of Israel. And sometimes that's just how that's how that thing works out. Back to Mark 12, verse 15. Shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, saith unto them, Why tempt ye me? Bring me a penny that I may see it. Now his answer is given in response to their hypocrisy. It's also interesting to me that Jesus didn't already have a penny. If you listen to Kenneth Copeland and those guys, they would tell you that the reason that Judas was the treasurer is because the disciples were just rolling in money. I mean, they were wearing designer clothes and they were rolling in it, man. It was, I mean, money, 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 money. That's why they needed a treasurer. But here we are right here, 3 days before he's going to die. Jesus doesn't have a penny. He has to go get a penny from somebody else. Let's look at Matthew 22. Just real quick, I want to point out one little thing in Matthew 22, which is the parallel to this. And we did not read it because I felt like I spent so much time in Matthew while teaching Mark that I was kind of trying to stay away. But I want you to see something here. Matthew 22, verse 18. But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. So back to Mark 12. So it's just interesting that that's called the tribute money. Because apparently, at least according to Exodus 30, you pay your temple tax in shekels and you pay your government tax in Roman currency, which that makes sense. Verse 16. And they brought yet the penny, and saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's. Okay, so you understand that. You understand that Caesar's picture, is his image is on the coin, minted by his government. Now, we still do that. We do that to honor past leaders. We do that in America. You know, George Washington's on the 1, Lincoln's on the 5, and Jackson's on the 20, and Grant's on the 50, and Benjamin Franklin, who was never president, is on the 100, and past that, I don't know. You'd have to have some sort of ego to want your picture on the money now. Yeah, like I said, the group the bad guys were in charge, and now we have these slightly less bad guys in charge. But I digress. So the Caesars of the world, and Caesar's a title like Pharaoh or Führer, they want to remind you on a daily basis who's in charge, and so they put their picture on the money. So Jesus is looking at this penny, and Caesar's picture and Caesar's name is on the money. Okay? Verse 17, and Jesus answered them, and said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God, and they marveled at him. So Caesar's image and Caesar's name are on the money. So there's no wrong in giving it back to Caesar. The sentence doesn't stop there. It's not just render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. There's a comma there, and the sentence goes on from there. What you can ascertain a lot from this passage. One thing you can ascertain from this passage is that there are things that are Caesar's, and there are things that are God's. And the way you know which is by whose image it bears. So what bears God's image? Well, you do, and I do. People are important because they are made in the image of God. That is the thing that is the thing that makes them important. Murder is a sin because men are made in the image of God. Let's just chase this for just a second. Let's look at Genesis 1. Genesis 1. Verse 26. I think it's where it's at. And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Now, if you jump ahead to Genesis 5, it says in the book, this is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day in which they were created. Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth. There's a teaching that I'm very sympathetic towards, but I don't think is 100% accurate, that says that when man fell, man lost God's image. And that's why Adam's son is said to be born in Adam's image and in Adam's likeness. The problem you have is that's not the last place where we're told that men are image bearers of God. See, okay. It's there, but don't get your brain wrapped around the axle. It means some things, but it doesn't mean everything. I, as a human being, still bear God's image, but it is marred by sin. I mean, if we had totally lost the image of God, there'd be no crime in murdering a man. Look at Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2. I want to say this carefully. You and I still bear the image of God, marred by sin. You and I still bear the likeness of God, marred by sin. Ephesians 2, what did I say? Did I give you a verse? Verse 11. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands. That at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were sometimes were far off, are made nigh by the blood of Christ. For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself twain one new man, so making peace, and so they might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereby, and came and preached peace to you which were far off, and them which were nigh. So what you have is a saved man. A lost man resembles God. A lost man is still the image of God. It's marred by sin. A saved man resembles God more than he did. And in Hebrews 1, verse 3, Jesus Christ is called the express image of God. Jesus Christ is the most perfect image of God to walk this earth since Adam, which is one of the reasons he's called the last Adam. We will cover this more next time. It's fun stuff. But I said it all to say this. The verse says, render unto God those things that are God's. Well, how do you know those? How do you know what's God's? Is it because we pointed at it and said that's God's? Or is it because the Bible says it's what bears the image of God that is God's? Just like the things that bear the image of Caesar or Caesar's, things that are God's bear the image of God. And what we're talking about, we're talking about people. We owe it to men who are made in the image of God the opportunity to be reconciled back into the God that made them. We owe it to Christ to obey him and try to reach them. That is, in one sense, rendering unto God the things that are God's. So what do? Well, you pay your taxes because it's Caesar, and then you preach the gospel because it's God's. You pray because it's God's. You give because it's God's. Verse 17 says, I'm still in Ephesians. I looked right at verse 17 and started to read it. Like, no, I'm not even in the right book. Mark 12, verse 17, as we try to find a landing spot here. And Jesus answering said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. Matthew 22. That's where we'll stop. Matthew 22. Where are we at? Yeah. When they heard these words, verse 22. When they heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. So once again, the Lord's enemies retreat at his words. Well, I'm going to stop there. We got other stuff we're trying to get done here. Thank you for listening, all 5 of you. This is Michael. This has been the Street Preacher's Corner podcast. And as always, I will see you on the other side.
Oh, it is wonderful. wonderful to be a Christian. I can't hear you, but it's wonderful to be God's child. Oh, it is wonderful to have your sins forgiven. Oh, it is wonderful to be redeemed, justified, forever reconciled.